But there were a couple of things that stood out to me about the Butcher interview. Oh, he said that he plots out a bunch of his characters when he first builds them. He kind of rolls them in D&D terms to help him figure out what they are. And he said he built Dresden originally as a wizard with 16 intelligence and 18 constitution. He's like, that's how I knew he was going to get beat up a lot. Well, you succeeded, Jim. Welcome one, welcome all, welcome to Recorded Neutral Territory, where the spoilers go all the way through Battleground. I'm Adam Ruzzo, and with me, as always, is a security guard doubting his own sanity. It's Brian O'Reilly.
So, Doc, they were right there on the screen. A half dozen wolves running down Maple Street.
Well, then why isn't there any recording of it?
It was on the camera. I don't know.
Welcome, everybody. We've got two quick announcements before we jump into the episode today. We have new commissioned artwork for the show. As I've mentioned in a couple different places, the artwork that we had when we started this show was a placeholder artwork until we could get a friend of mine, a cousin actually, to commission some artwork for us. So if you refresh your podcatchers or if you don't see the new artwork, probably unsubscribing and resubscribing to the podcast will cause that to show up. We think it looks really cool. I'll put a link in the show notes if you'd like to take a look at it more directly. And if you want, examine it for all the Easter eggs that we hid in there. So, Brian, let's jump into it. We're on night number 4. We're heading into the final confrontation. Talk to us about what's going on here.
Chapter 28 has the gang, which now includes Harry, Tara, 5 alphas, and Susan, driving up to Marcone's estate, which seems like it's pretty huge, but it's not so big that you can't go around it. He probably has, I don't know, an acre or two. We're not talking about something totally palatial, but it's very big. And Harry sends the wolves, specifically Tara, around to scout an entrance. But the entrance is too far away, so they're not all going to be able to go in the same way. Now, Adam, you noted something that a few people have noted about the 5 kids who accompany Harry, Tara, and Susan, and it seems like they're all people we know.
Yeah, from what we can tell, if we look at the descriptions of the kids referenced here, obviously there's Billy and Georgia, but it does look like we also have Marcy, Andy, and Kirby. That also is what the wiki says. So I think it can be fairly certain that that is what we're seeing here. Now, Brian, if that's the case, do you think it's a coincidence that those 5 are the ones that happen to stay around the longest?
Definitely not, because we know the alphas do a lot of good stuff in the University of Chicago area, but we don't actually know how often the other alphas see anything supernatural. So it's sort of easy to walk away from it if you're not somebody who's coming to face with a Loup Garu or a Hexenwolfen or whatever. And of course, the only other alphas who we do see come face to face with the Hexenwolfen here are injured. And that's a different reason why they might not come back for round 2. So these are the 5 who in the beginning experience a little bit of how big the supernatural world is, but also walk away pretty unscathed, though not totally in this encounter.
Yeah, and remember, these are the volunteers. Billy could be heard announcing to them, okay, you guys can come. You got to follow Dresden's rules. If you don't want to come, the rest of you are going to stay here and guard the others, right? Like, so these are the volunteers, the boldest among them. So it does make sense, I think, that these are the ones that stick with it the longest.
And they're probably also the gaming group that Harry joins. So they're the ones that have the strongest connection to Dresden himself, and therefore feel more of an obligation to keep one foot in the supernatural world. Now, I'm actually not certain if they're the only 5 alphas that we ever see again. I seem to remember that there are other unnamed alphas either in Summer Night or a little bit later in the books, but these are definitely the only ones who are around post changes.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I do believe we see the majority of the alphas in Summer Night, though they aren't really named. We'll have to go through when we get to that book and find out, like, are there a dozen of them? Does Harry describe how many are coming with him?
I think it's more than 5, yeah, but I'm not sure how many more.
So the next thing I want to talk about here, Brian, because as you said, Tara is scouting around the outside of the facility looking for the best way in. And this is a walled facility. And Harry has everybody switch into their furry form. So when Tara comes back and says, there's only one way in, there's a wall, part of the wall that's crumbled, Harry's like, well, I'm going over here because I can't run all the way over there. And she's like, well, they can't switch back and forth and they can't climb over the wall now because they're in wolf form. And it's just an astonishing lack of planning from Team Dresden. And again, I get it. He is beat to crap and he's not thinking as clearly as he might otherwise. And this is an early version of the character. So he's not as competent and forward thinking as later. But it just feels like this entire night is so poorly thought out, right down to him calling out his opponent when he doesn't really have a plan.
Yeah, if this wasn't put together at the last minute, it would almost seem too bad to be realistic, which is a little funny because in real life, people make terrible plans all the time when they don't anticipate the potential complications. But we expect our heroes in these kinds of works not to do that. That's part of the reason why we like them and think they're admirable. So the fact that this is such a terrible infiltration plan, I mean, it's not even an infiltration plan. They have no idea how they're going to do the infiltration, really. It's through sheer luck that the wolves can get in at all. If Tara doesn't find that crumpled piece of wall, I mean, how even are they going to help in any way? So it's definitely pretty crazy. And like you said, the fact that Harry called out Denton specifically, saying, I'm going to be there, to Roger, is given an extra dose of, are you sure, man? When we realize that Dresden has no way of figuring out how exactly he's going to be there. He's putting them on high alert that he's going to show up, but he has no idea how he's going to get in. So that seems like a really good way to get shot before you even walk through the door. And in this scene, he's really bailed out by two things. One, everybody doesn't think that they should kill anyone before McFinn arrives, presumably because the Loup Garu doesn't mess around with corpses. So if you want to have some bodies destroyed so badly that you can't identify them, they have
no
to be
ballistics
alive.
For a Loup Garu attack, for sure.
And that means they got to be alive when he gets there, because otherwise the Loup Garu is not a beast that's interested in eating, it's interested in killing. So they have to be alive. And also he's bailed out by the fact that Marcone presumably still wants Harry alive, because I guess he actually still wants to twist Harry's arm into that offer, because the next time we see Marcone, which is, I believe, Death Masks, he has guard. So he really thinks he needs a magical consigliere, and he's willing to do just about anything to get it, even at this point, not killing Dresden.
Yeah, and two more things about this. Number one, Tara comes back and says, okay, here, there's this crumbled place that doesn't have any of the boxes with glass eyes. It is a fortunate position, is what she says. Okay, this is a severe slip-up, but I can cut Tara some slack for not seeing this as the trap that it turns out to be.
It's a trap!
Yeah, it's a trap, guys! Hey, the one place where the wall is broken also doesn't happen to have cameras? Come on. Now, she is not full human, we know that, so maybe she's not expecting a trap like this. I kind of feel like what we've seen from her, it feels a little incongruous that she doesn't see this as a trap. But Harry, Blackstone, Copperfield, Dresden, this is an obvious trap, buddy. Come on. This is Marcone we're talking about. Do you think he doesn't pay the masonry guy to maintain the wall around his estate? He's all about appearances. Did somebody crash into the wall in a car like 10 hours ago? That's the only reason there would be a hole in his defense.
Right. And Dresden obviously can't blow a hole through a wall. And I think that's what, like, Winter Night Harry does, right? He makes a distraction by blowing something up a la Cold Days and has everybody slip in through the back door, so to speak. But, I mean, can't they just have Susan, like, crash the rental van or something? Just do anything to make a commotion, to at least pull some eyes in the wrong direction before you guys do your infiltration into the clearly orchestrated, place they want you to walk in.
Yeah, I think one assumption that Harry's making here is that Marcone is not working with the FBI. So Harry called out Roger and said, I'm going to be there. But Marcone theoretically doesn't know Harry's coming because it surprises him later when he sees them working together, because this is a rare moment where Marcone is outfoxed by somebody else, right? Now, the last thing I want to point out here. Okay, Harry is showing up here to confront the FBI because they're the bad guys. He has a backup plan. He's got a belt of his own that he can use in an emergency. Okay, he's got an ace up his sleeve. I will give him that, maybe. And his other plan, as we find out, is that he wants to talk to Agent Denton and try to convince him to give up the belts willingly, right? He wants to try to point out to him, look what it's doing to your team. You need to end this. And it almost works, or it seems to almost work. So that's his plan. It's a long shot, but it could work. But Brian, what is his plan to deal with the oncoming Loup Garu? Because he's walking into this with no plan for the Loup Garu. And that one is what really gets me.
And importantly, no magic, because that could just be his plan. I'm going to bind it.
Right.
But he can't do that. So it is kind of set up to be a suicide mission. And maybe it's sort of unconscious. He's not thinking about the plan because part of him knows he actually does have inherited silver. You know, it's not in his the forefront, but, you know, Shadow Harry is sitting there.
Is thinking about it, trying to convince him.
Exactly. But, you know, I understand. You make a good point. If the FBI are also infiltrating, then it makes sense that maybe you're going to be able to get in either in their wake or ahead of them. At the same time, though, if the FBI are also infiltrating and McFinn's going to show up at some point, this is almost certainly going to trip Marcone's security, because there's no way a dozen people are going to get onto the property with nobody noticing.
Right.
So it does seem that even if Harry sort of feels like he has a little bit more of the upper hand than he actually does in reality, it's still a little cavalier to go in just by taking the first opening you can.
Yeah, I will give Jim something here for sure, because the way this plays out is really excellent for building the tension, because Harry says, well, I can't run around there. I'm going to have to go over the wall here. And they said, okay, stay where you are. Tara says, stay where you are. We'll come to you after we get in. And then he gets in there and waits and waits. And he's alone in the rain, in the bushes, in the cold, in the dark, and he's alone. Something has gone wrong. That's like the last sentence of this chapter. Something had gone wrong. I was alone. And then he tries to slowly figure out what happens in the next chapter. He's slightly panicking a little bit, right? And then he sees, as he comes out through the trees, Billy running across and getting tranquilized, and then realizes that the lumps that are in the grass that he had taken to be like features of rocks or something was actually all of his allies, and they're all down.
Yeah. And, you know, Tara must have gone in first, and they got her first. And the rest of the wolves just didn't really have a plan after that, because they're able to bring them down in short order. The one thing that works to their advantage here is if you were making a plan, this is kind of what you'd do. You'd have two groups. Now, one of them would probably be a feint, and the other one would be the real operation. But the only reason why they're actually able to stall enough that when they're all thrown in the pit, it's a little bit too haphazard to perfectly hold them, in my opinion, is that by coming in through another route, Harry actually extends the time of the confrontation.
Yeah. It's really tragic. In chapter 26, Billy and the other alphas are so excited about going on this mission, like this big, real mission. Like, I'm sure they've been working on taking out like muggers or something in the alley, but this is a real supernatural threat. They're going to take down these Hexenwolf that are as FBI agents. And they get in here and they just instantly go down and have no actual impact on any fighting at all. They might as well have not been there in the end. And it has to be a very humbling experience for them, but it also feels like something that might happen on somebody's first mission.
Yeah, I think it's a really good narrative choice by Jim. I actually think that Harry's planning in this confrontation is obviously something we're criticizing, but I think the way Jim sets this up is very realistic. Harry does a bad job because he's tired and he hasn't done this before, and the alphas get taken out immediately because they're not really up for this level of play. You know, they're minor leaguers who are trying to step into the big leagues. And it's a good narrative choice to have them taken out this way because it feels bad enough that we buy that as the consequences of doing something like this before you're ready, but Jim doesn't have to kill any of them, which is, I think, the only other way he could have made that land.
Yeah, it's a reckless thing, and it makes sense that it should be punished somehow. And this is sort of a light punishment by the author. We don't have to kill any of the alphas yet.
It's like the minimum that would work while still punishing the choice. It's a really nice balance.
Yeah. So that takes us through to the beginning of chapter 29, when Harry watches the last of his allies get tranquilized, and the FBI and Marcone overhears a discussion between them and realizes that Marcone doesn't know that they're working against him. And Marcone, of course, has Harry's number. And when he realizes that the wolves are coming in from that side and a camera on the other side directly opposite has failed, then that's probably where Dresden is infiltrating, and like points right in his general vicinity. And that's the end of chapter 29, is Harry's like, oh crap, they're coming right to search the trees right where I am.
And of course, Harry not moving at all is, again, bad strategic choice, right? You get in through this breach. Now you need to move parallel to where you want to go so that nobody knows what direction you're coming from. But Dresden is tired. Things aren't going the way that they're supposed to. So he doesn't do that. And that probably saves his life, because the fact that he gets surprised in chapter 30 by Denton and the FBI agents and Marcone sweeping directly in his direction means that he has to bolt. And when he bolts and somebody, probably Ben, takes a shot at him, Harry returns fire. The fact that Harry uses the gun and they know he has one might be the only reason that they don't rush him as wolves, because while Marcone wants him taken alive, the FBI agents definitely want him dead, and going after him as wolves is a great way to kind of whoops that whole situation. But they don't. They come at him with guns as a gun battle, because presumably they're worried he's a good enough shot to take them down if they come as wolves, which he is not. So only by that firing on the move thing that they, I guess, presumably think he's competent enough to actually try to pull off, does he buy the time and distance he needs to extend this confrontation.
Well, they're trained FBI agents. They're probably trained to assume if somebody's got a gun that you just have to assume they probably are pretty good with it. Because if you assume the other way, you probably don't last as an agent for very long.
For sure, yeah.
So Harry, like you said, fires into the air. He specifically said he doesn't want to fire back at them for fear of hitting Tara or one of the alphas, because he's not a very good shot and he's running, so he doesn't want to chance it. And it stalls them for a second. He's able to get under a tree. I get the impression that he's like hiding under the lowest branches of like a really deep, big fern tree or something like that. As he's hiding there, Denton comes and Harry just holds his breath. Denton keeps moving. Harry manages to get the drop on him, come up behind him, and put a gun to the back of his head and send him out to call his friends, try to use him as a hostage to get what he wants. And in this confrontation, Brian, one of my favorite sort of badass moments from Harry that we get out of this book, where Denton is sort of threatening to like try to escape while this gun is to the back of his head. And Harry says, "Try it." I said. I thumbed back the hammer on the gun. But after the loud noise, remember to keep going down the tunnel and toward the light.
Bone chilling.
Yeah.
Cold as fuck.
Yeah. That's like the line that his shadow would say. Like, that's the line he wants to be, the cool guy he wants to be. But who he actually is the wizard running around in pajamas because he didn't prepare properly.
Well, I think to a certain extent, that survival instinct that's been banished to the unconscious throughout the close of this book is kind of taking over here. And some of that, coldness is coming in, because he also says, as he's walking Denton out of the woods, "Now," I said, "walk. Don't trip, because I swear to God, I'd rather blow your head off over a misunderstanding than get suckered." And that works. He gets Denton at least to buy it enough that he really will shoot him, that when Harris says Dresden doesn't have the guts, Denton tells him to stand down. He's backed into a corner. That line keeps things from blowing up, because Ben and Harris are ready to do some reckless stuff if Denton doesn't lay down the law.
Yeah. And again, Denton's the one with the gun to his head, and he's also the coolest, smartest thinker out of all of them. He knows he's got an ace up his sleeve, too. He knows he's got Murphy hiding in the woods. He doesn't need to risk some kind of a fight while there's a gun pointed at the back of his head. He doesn't need to risk the idea that Dresden isn't the kind of person who would do that. He has not yet soul-gazed Dresden. He doesn't know that for sure.
Yeah, Denton is a great villain because he's courageous, but he's also manipulative. When he sends Harry to the street wolves to try to get him taken out that way, or when he holds Murphy specifically as a potential counterweight if he needs her, these are very cold and calculating moves that add to his competence in direct confrontation. He's also better than Dresden in indirect confrontation. So it really raises your respect for Denton kind of right when you need it, because the whole arc of this climax only works if Denton is enough of a threat that you're really worried something really bad is going to happen.
Yeah, so the next thing that happens is Harry is asking why Denton is doing all this. And what he's trying to get at is, why are you doing this? And then try to show Denton, okay, but you're not achieving that goal. Look what's happening to Ben. Look what's happening to Roger. They're already almost gone. You can't keep doing this, and try to reason with him. One of the things that Denton says here is, what gives them the right to kill? Should I stand by and let them slaughter Dresden if I can stop it? I have the power and the responsibility to use it, unquote, which is a very interesting mirror of Harry using the Spider-Man, great power comes with great responsibility. So that, of course, the same motivation hitting both men in very different ways.
Yeah, Denton's pulling the, as we've referenced, Batman should just kill the Joker card, and he makes a case that's compelling enough to him, at least, and he's reasoning from a place of, motivation, but compelling enough to him to keep Dresden's ploy, Dresden's idea that he's going to convince Denton to stand down, from working. We're going to talk a little bit about how they're both able to come to these two very different conclusions, Denton and Harry, using essentially the same core ethical principle in our assessment of the book. So we think this is important. We're going to talk about it, and we've been talking about it throughout the book, but we're going to go over it in the assessment. But I think we should bear in mind that the way Denton reacts to his own direct killing of innocents, and the way Harry reacts to even playing a small role in Kim Delaney's death, really sums up an important difference in their characters. Denton is rationalizing those things away, and Harry is racked with guilt.
Yeah, so if you compare these two, Denton directly kills an innocent, and what is his reaction? It was unfortunate, an accident. It was never my intention. Meanwhile, Harry indirectly gets Kim Delaney killed and, like you said, racked with guilt. Existential crisis, more or less, in his mind. Like, that's how much more responsible Harry feels for his own actions, whereas Denton just waves them away with his hand. I never intended to do that, therefore it's not my fault. That's definitely the road to hell being paved with good intentions and all that.
And Harry presses him because Denton has intentions that are, from Harry's perspective, unacceptable. He's going to blame people for his actions. He's going to have other people take the punishments that are due him. And what does Denton say to that? Necessary sacrifices. There was work to be done. Dresden.
Yeah, and I wonder, I got to ask you this, Brian, because Denton suggests that the Street Wolves, Mac Finn, and now Dresden, because he got involved, all were necessary sacrifices in the original goal of killing Marcone. But I would argue they are not that necessary. If the FBI, all four of them, came in as wolves and tried to kill Marcone, they probably could, and then they could probably get away. And who is going to suspect them? Nobody. There's no connection between them as wolves and the FBI. So I would argue that he can probably get away with this without these sacrifices. I don't think they were necessary.
And I think that honestly probably is his original plan. And I agree with you. Given how devastating the Hex and Wolfen are in the Street Wolves garage, I think that they absolutely could have torn through any security that Marcone has in, whatever place they decide to ambush him in. But wouldn't the White Council be able to figure out what happened? I think someone has put that fear into them sufficiently that they do think these are necessary sacrifices. It's the only way they'll be able to do this important thing and get away with it. And from that perspective, I think they are correct, because to be able to do this such that no one, supernatural or otherwise, could figure out they were responsible would require them to, essentially put other people on the chopping block. The question I then have is, but what does that actually accomplish? You kill Marcone and Chicago crime goes away? I think that's maybe a different question to ask. They were necessary to kill Marcone, but why is that necessary? What's that going to solve?
Yeah, and that's going to be part of our philosophical debate when we assess the book and, of course, its villain in our final episode on Full Moon. But for now, we're going to continue on. At the end of this chapter, Denton brings out his whole card. He's got Murphy trussed up, and they got a knife to her throat, and they say, play nice, Dresden. And he panics because he thinks they're going to hurt her, and he tries to take a shot, and then they take down Dresden. Then they throw everybody in the pit. All of Team Dresden, including Murphy, including Tara and the Alphas, all get thrown into the pit, with Marcone also very quickly joining them by being strung up. Harry, of course, trying to convince Marcone. And I want to point out at this point, when Harry is trying to convince Marcone and says, I shit you not, John, they are trying to kill you, it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work, Brian? Because he has used lies to separate Marcone from his allies before, and now he's telling the truth, and they don't believe him. It's the boy who cried wolf again for the second time this book. The first time, if you recall, we talked about how Murphy didn't believe him with regards to Kim Delaney, or wouldn't believe him if he had tried to explain it to her, because he'd already burned too many bridges by betraying her trust too many times. So now she wouldn't understand, and she wouldn't believe him when it really wasn't his fault. Now it's the same thing. He lied to Marcone, and now Marcone won't take his truth at this point. And I thought that was kind of a fun allusion to, again, the boy who cried wolf.
Yeah, I mean, you almost feel like we're inserting the wolf-related pun here, but I feel like it's either intentional or subconscious, because Denton literally does a Three Little Pigs, I'll huff and I'll puff reference at the end of the chapter. So Jim definitely has wolf fairy tales on the brain when he's writing this. It's just a question of how intentional is it? And, I think it honestly is. If he's going to do a why the boy who cried wolf gets in trouble message anywhere in the books, I mean, this is the time to do it for multiple reasons. Mm-hmm. It's also the mistake that sort of a younger person makes with being too alarmist or not thinking about the long-term consequences of a game that's iterated. In game theory, when you're going to be involved with the same people over and over again, you have to make sure your tactics account for the fact that you'll be playing with them in the future. You can't just try to take advantage of them because they'll remember that.
Yeah, but Dresden never pays attention to game theory in the way you're describing with Marcone. He just stays as antagonistic as possible, despite the fact that Marcone's going to be in the game for a long time. That's just how he rolls. Okay, so right during this confrontation where Harry is dealing with them pulling out Murphy and everything, Harry winds up soul-gazing with Denton, sort of to buy time before Marcone intervenes and everything goes to hell. Now, during this soul gaze, we see Denton kneeling at someone's feet as he receives the belt. We're definitely going to talk about, who is this? Who gave them the belts? Who told them about the White Council? That's our question for next week's Question for Bob. So we're going to skip over it for now and talk about it next week. And the other question that we're going to ask about is, what did Denton see in Harry's soul? Because he has a very interesting response here. And we're going to talk about that on this week's Question for Bob. So we're also skipping over that just now. So that sort of brings us through the middle of chapter 31, where the FBI agents have thrown everybody down into the pit, including all of Team Dresden and Marcone is strung up above, and that's where we're stopping in the middle of chapter 31 for today's chapter discussion.
Now, before we get to the question for Bob, so they're bringing McFinn in to do their killing for them so that there's effectively no evidence that they played a role. It seems like some kind of crazy freak thing that Special Investigations is going to have to spend a year, dealing with the paperwork for.
Mm-hmm.
How are they going to deal with McFinn?
That's an interesting question. Did they bring Inherited Silver with them? Or I got the impression they were just going to set this all up and go, all right, that everything's taken care of. Marcone's dead. All the people who know that we were involved are dead. And yeah, McFinn's out there and he's the obvious culprit. So the White Council's going to go after him and we're good.
And I think that you're absolutely right. And that resolves a bit of a plot hole that you could find in what's going to happen next. Essentially, why are Harry and co. put into the pit so haphazardly that they are able to get out? It's because McFinn's on his way.
Yeah.
And the FBI don't want to be there when McFinn arrives. They are not planning to confront him. They are planning to bail and get far enough away that they don't think McFinn will come for them. So the reason why the gang is able to do all the things they do to get out of the pit is because the FBI can't stay close enough to watch them, lest they risk bringing McFinn down on themselves.
Yeah, I could totally see them with like binoculars or looking through a sniper scope or something up on Marcone's mansion, like on the roof or whatever, and just watching as Marcone throws the knife to get himself down and or swings back and forth and all that stuff, and just going, oh God, I hope he doesn't get down before. Oh, hey, there it is. Okay, we're good. It's all good, people. We can see McFinn's right there. So I could totally see that happening.
Okay, so that brings us to this week's question for Bob. Bob, I know you've never had a Soulgaze, but what's your theory? Does everybody see the same thing when they Soulgaze Harry?
Yeah, you're right. I don't think Bob would really have a good answer to this, but it doesn't matter because he can't make it. He sent us a message. He sent us text messages now. I guess he could just do that. He said he got stuck inside Mr. And he's stuck somewhere outside and it's daytime. I don't know. It's really confusing.
If that's true, that's really impressive because I did not know that a cat could manipulate a text keyboard.
So we're going to talk about this. Now, before we get started, I got a couple of quick points to make. Number one, here's a quick list of the people who have gazed with Harry that we see in the main books and their reaction. Morgan and probably Ebenezer, we don't see their reactions because we just presume that those happened during Harry's trial. I think it's alluded to in a couple different places.
We're kind of assuming, but it's a strong assumption.
Strong assumption, yeah. Susan fainted. Marcone, no noticeable reaction, but I don't know what to draw from that because he's famous for his poker face.
Yeah, like, I know what to draw from that. Marcone is famous for his poker face. That's what you draw from that.
Exactly. But I kind of got the impression that he was confirming something he already suspected about Dresden, and that's what he got out of the Soulgaze. So then we have Monica Sells, who goes into shock and is shaking, and we don't know quite exactly what's causing that. It's not necessarily described as she's terrified. Who knows? But then we got Parker, who's stunned for a moment. Agent Denton, who responds with fear, where he says, "No, I don't believe in hell, wizard. I won't let you." Between that and Molly Carpenter's reaction is like the two most telling, which is very interesting because they're very different.
And it's important to realize that not only is Denton afraid, his reaction is to try to kill Harry immediately. So it's not just, I'm afraid that I'm going to go to hell when I die. It's, I'm afraid that you are going to do something to me that's going to make me experience this hell that I'm seeing.
Right. That is some powerful emotion. So then we have Michael Carpenter. We don't see his reaction because it happens off screen, but we know that the result of this is that he trusts Harry implicitly. So I would argue that is probably a positive reaction in the end. Then we see Rasmussen, but we don't really see his reaction because he's in bear form. So Ursule is in control. Then Thomas, of course, isn't really a soul gaze in the standard sense. It's more like a voicemail from their mother. They both experience that. So that is not the same. Molly responds with compassion. Quote, "My God, I never knew." And then later when she describes it, "I saw what kind of man you are. Kind, gentle, lonely, hungry, unquote. I think that's pretty clear that she has sort of a compassionate response to him. Helen Beckett has no clear reaction. Evelyn Derrick is both terrified and in awe of him. She is, by the way, the lawyer in Turncoat who Madeline had under her thumb. And then Martin has no listed reaction because he's literally dying as the soul gaze happens. It's really more of a soul gaze designed for Harry to get his backstory out into the field. Then the Kraken, of course, is terrified to the point of running away from the wizard. Bradley, in Battleground, the detective, fell to the ground, gasping and stunned for several minutes while Rudolph freaks the hell out. And it's hard to tell. I will point out, Emotional Emetic pointed out that Bradley's reaction might not be the reaction to the soul gaze so much as, holy shit, magic is real and it just happened to me. And I kind of buy that. Part of that reaction has to be exposure to real magic for the first time.
I agree that that's true, that that's part of his reaction. I think even if he already believed, he would have had a similar reaction.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. So you look at that list of people who have gazed with Harry, and I tried to format it like, okay, do bad guys have bad reactions and good guys have good reactions? And it kind of falls into that category, but I just don't think we have enough real data points where we can say that for sure. One more thing before we get started is a word of Jim, because this will help color our answers to this question, where he said in an interview, for instance, a gaze could show you that a man was self-disciplined, sober, highly organized, dedicated to his principles, and that he loved dogs. And all of that would be true, but it doesn't tell you everything about Adolf Hitler. Granted, a soul gaze with Hitler would probably have given off a big vibe of either crazy or ruthless also. They tend to give you a pretty good core sample of the individual in question. However, every wizard gets things a bit differently from any other in terms of how the soul gaze is perceived. Not every wizard sees in symbols and allegory the way that Harry does. Unquote.
Jim has also stated that in order for someone's soul to change enough for that to be noticeable in a soul gaze, they'd need an absolutely colossal change to their core being. Like his example is a billionaire who has a near-death experience, gives away all his money and lives as a hermit. That guy would have a different before and after soul gaze, but that's the level of change we're talking about. And Adam, I think, do we agree on the speculation that if such a huge change did happen, it would actually perhaps make you eligible for another gaze with the same person? Like if Harry gazes them before, then they'd see one thing, but then he could actually gaze them again after that change and see something different.
Yeah, I would speculate that would probably be true, if not for any other reason than because it would make for an interesting story. And if Jim ever wanted to put something like in there, like that could be a short story where a prisoner like had fully repented, like they were a horrible person before, and Dresden had gazed them as part of like when he was working for Nick Angel or something, and this guy was somebody that captured kids, and now he's on death row, and Harry is able to gaze him again, much to his surprise, and realizes this is like a different soul now. And that would be an interesting philosophical debate. So that's probably true. So that brings us to the question, does everybody see the same thing when they gaze Harry? And I think based on word of Jim and a bunch of other information that we have in the books, the answer is no, they don't definitely don't see the same exact thing. But I think they get the same information delivered in probably different ways. That's kind of the question I was trying to ask. So do you think that is true? Do you think they get the same information, or do they get different information?
I do have a suspicion that that's essentially true. But I think it's important to set the table for this by discussing some of our listener responses. So Barry Island Idiot said, essentially, yes. Basically, a soul gaze, lets somebody interpret the soul of the person they're gazing in a way they can understand. They all see the same basic essence because it's the same soul. I'm adding that, but in a way unique to them. And I think that's a good articulation of effectively what you were saying to set the table there. That because it's the same thing that you're sampling, even if your sample reflects something different, you're getting information about the same thing.
Yeah, and Zytix said the same concept in probably my favorite way. They said, the soul is far too vast for a mortal to comprehend, so the viewer sees a facet reflecting their interaction with him. Evil sees judgment, enforcers of order see rivalry, and love sees a protector, unquote. I really like that idea. I think that's very clever about who you are kind of has a reflection of what you see in Harry.
That's really good. And I think it actually dovetails nicely with Halcyon Knight's point, because you can see something reflecting that interaction even if what you're seeing is effectively the same. It's going to be colored by your own perception. Halcyon Knight says, quote, Denton thought he saw hell. Michael and McCoy, and arguably Marcone, trusted him implicitly afterwards. Susan fell in love. Molly didn't fall out of love and just said, I never knew, like there was some big secret. Personally, I think they see him in a hellscape as the last thing standing alone between us and the outside. And I suspect he looks at least as bloodied and pained and wearied as Murphy did to the site.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea. And I think it does actually fit with Denton's reaction because he goes into essentially denial, right? He wants to disbelieve that what he just saw was true. So if Harry is the last thing holding back the chaos of the outside, and that's what Denton is being shown, that means Harry's a good guy. You can't kill him. But Denton goes in denial and says, no, I don't believe that. I have to kill you, right? He immediately has that response. So I could see that being I could see that being part of what Denton did see right there.
Yeah, that definitely also matches parts of what I think is going on, for sure. But we did get some people who don't agree on that essential sort of sameness between all gazers, who basically said that they all see their own personal interpretation of Harry's soul, and that even though it's the same essence, the differences in their subjective experience are significant enough that it really colors what they're seeing from their perspective. So Stormhenge, for example, says, quote, Harry says every Soulgaze and Soulgazer is unique. Carlos hears music, and I think Molly feels emotions. Harry sees metaphor. So any experience anyone has with gazing Harry is going to be equally unique. There is no one awesome image he projects out. He's not an answering machine with an outgoing message.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. And it did make me ask in my head, like, okay, if Harry sees metaphor and Carlos hears music, if Harry was to soul gaze Murphy, does Murphy see Harry in metaphor because Harry's the one doing the soul gazing? And if Carlos was to gaze Murphy, does she then see Carlos in music or something to that effect? Or does each individual person, regardless of their status as wizard, have their own way of interpreting it? And I kind of think the wizard is the one that sets the terms. And if you have two wizards gazing each other, the stronger one would probably have their version will out, or maybe they both have their own version that they see. That's kind of more intuitive to me, but we don't really have any evidence to back that up.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some way that wizards influence the process of the soul gaze, because if that wasn't possible, then the voicemail spell that Maggie Sr. uses wouldn't work. Right. If you couldn't influence a soul gaze magically, she couldn't cast that spell. So there's something to that. I think that everyone sees things in the way it is most effective to communicate with them. And it says interesting things about people, right? If this Molly emotions thing is correct, that makes sense. Molly's an empath. Carlos hears music because he's sort of getting these essential ideas from this complex interweaving of themes, let's say, in a way that Harry doesn't really need. Harry needs it to be kind of upfront and direct and symbolic for him because Harry's a very direct person. So I think that the person gazing with you experiences the gaze in whatever way allows them to best interpret it. But I have to say, the way you're saying it sounds like it would kind of make for better stories about soul gazes. So I wonder if Jim will use that, because it does create some cool dynamics.
Yeah, we had some other answers for like what they're seeing. Best Acanthicida 6379 says, everybody basically seems some form of the same three things: his willingness to do the right thing, his desire for power or his black magic taint, and ultimately his kindness. Now, I think that's interesting because maybe instead of judgment or that hellscape that we were talking about, what the terrified responses are seeing his dark potential, his dark nature, his possibility as a destroyer. And the other people that have positive reactions are seeing his protective nature, his kindness. Maybe that is brought out depending upon the viewer, as was stated earlier.
And I think that's certainly possible, though I'm going to get to what I think people see. And I don't think this is exactly the way I would articulate it, though I do believe that these elements are all important to what people see when they gaze Harry. Eloquosiraptor says, quote, additionally, I believe several clues in the text point to Soul-Gazes showing you the specific aspects of someone that are somehow reflected in who you are. To give an overly simple and contrived example, you Soul-Gaze a warrior poet, and if you are a fighter yourself, you see the warrior side of it. If you're a lover, not a fighter, you see the poet side. I think that is the best answer for why people wouldn't see the same thing, that it's on the basis of what your souls are connecting about, not just about who the other person is.
Yeah. And when it comes down to it, I think the answer that most closely aligned with what I was thinking when I put this question out there is from Medley98, who said, quote, they probably see pretty much the same thing, but what that means is different to them. For example, to someone that knows Harry, they probably see how steadfast and unshakable in his belief he is, how battered he is, and how that doesn't stop him. An antagonist sees those things and gets scared, unquote. So I think the thing that I tried to square in my head is what could be a single thing that everybody sees, whether they see it in different ways, right? That's certainly possible. But what kind of core essence of Harry could be something that everybody sees and yet have so vastly different reactions to? And the one that came to my mind is judgment. What they see is Harry's judgment of them. And so if he's gazing an antagonist, part of that is he's judging you. And that's, Denton is like, no, I won't go to hell. I don't believe in it, right? Because he sees Harry's judgment of his character. That sort of concept of Harry as a judge got my mind spinning into, okay, well, we are all hypothesizing that maybe Harry becomes an immortal by the end of this series. Like maybe that's the kind of immortal he becomes, some kind of a judge that comes in and deals with imbalances. When the little guy is getting picked on by the bully, you call on Harry, the judge, who will come in, weigh the case, and decide to punish the bad guy or intervene or something like that. I just love that sort of concept as a metaphor over the course of the series.
I'll tell you what, you didn't even mention this, but something I love about that is what immortal have we met who feels a connection to Harry? Hades. And that's what he does. And to a certain extent, Odin, who also likes Harry. They judge the slain, both of them. Now,
and of course, Mab has her judgment form as well.
Yeah, I think that is a really good way of putting it. I'm going to slightly spin that. I think that one thing that if Harry was able to gaze himself, he might see is effectively what TV tropes calls the Determinator, which you can think of as like the Terminator from the movies. No matter what you hit it with, it just keeps coming. It's the horror movie killer that you can't stop. Or on the other hand, a very perseverant hero, your Frodo in Lord of the Rings. And if Harry's coming for you, if he's judging you, if you're on the other side, that's scary as hell. But if you want Frodo to succeed, it's inspiring. And if you don't know whether what he's doing is good, you're just shocked that anyone's going through this. But yeah. I want to take a step back and frame what people see when they gaze Harry through the lens of a soul gaze that Harry has. I think the most interesting soul gaze in the series is Harry's gaze of Molly in Proven Guilty when he sees all of her potential futures. I think Harry sees that because in that moment, that's what's most important to him.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
But I think that that's also fundamental to a soul gaze. When Harry gazes Thomas, he sees the inner struggle between his natures that will lead him down one of a couple different paths. So I imagine that a lot of people who gaze Harry don't just see who he is now. Like with Molly, they see who he might become. And some of those things make you fall in love with him, drive you to think that he is one of the most overwhelmingly self-sacrificial people you'll ever meet. But some of the other things that you might see, which you might focus on more if you're not trying to see the good in him, are the other things Harry might become. Because we know Harry's a Starborn and he might save everybody. But we also know that when Morgan gazed Harry, which we presume he did at the trial, it didn't put to rest the idea that Harry might be the destroyer. Some part of Morgan thought that that was still on the table, which makes me think that a lot of people see that. And if you don't know what's what, those two things look pretty similar. If somebody's standing on the battlefield holding the banner of good in the face of evil, well, that looks pretty terrifying. But if somebody's standing on the battlefield holding the banner of evil, that seems really deeply scary. And if you get those two images, it might not look like people who are on different sides. It might look like the same guy, just time-lapsed.
Yeah, absolutely. That is certainly one of the things I've always considered is like maybe they're seeing the potential the way that we saw Molly. But I think you hit the nail on the head where part of what you see in a soul gaze is what you're looking for in the moment when it starts. And a lot of people, they're not thinking about that because they don't even know what a soul gaze is in many of these examples. Like Monica Sells doesn't know a soul gaze is coming. And so as a result, they see what it like the default. Like they're not choosing what they get shown. They get shown like the core essence without getting to try to see what they're trying to look for. Because sometimes Harry does seem to see things that are directly tied to what he's looking for. And that's very convenient to the plot, of course. Now, one other point I wanted to make. For a long time, I thought, okay, well, whatever people see, it can't be that bad because it caused Michael Carpenter to stick by his side this whole series. So he must be a good person, and that must be what the soul gaze is showing. But after I had reread the series a couple of times, I reconsidered that, and I thought if Michael went into that thinking, what is this man, right? What is his future? What kind of thing? And he sees the potential futures the way that we see when he looks at Molly. Then what Michael might determine is this is not necessarily a good man, but my presence can lead him down a better path. So I will choose to trust him because that trust can make a difference in his future. And like literally, if I treat him like a bad person, he'll become a bad person. But if I treat him like a good person and trust him implicitly, that will lead him down the right path. And that's something that Michael would absolutely do.
And I really love that because what beautiful poetry would that be, right? Michael gazes Harry and sees this guy could be such a good person, but that might not be what happens. You know what? I'm going to tell him he's a good person all the time, and I'm going to reinforce that as a core belief about himself, and I'm going to drive him towards that amazing outcome that I see and away from this bad one. And then what happens later? Harry gazes his daughter and sees the exact same thing and has the exact same reaction. I love that idea.
It's a really beautiful mirror. And I hope we do finally find out what that gaze with Michael saw. Like, I feel like Jim has been very purposefully preventing Harry from asking anybody what they see. That's been like a central mystery. Like, what do they see when they look at Harry? Because it's always such a mysterious question of what's going on with these reactions. I feel like one of these days we're going to find out through Michael's eyes. And I think that's what we're going to see. I think that would be a beautiful way to do it because Michael's explanation is probably going to be more charitable than anybody else's. But I love the idea that he looked at that and said, okay, there's like a 90% chance this guy's going to become the destruction of the world. But I'm going to try to help make him on that 10% chance, even if I'm risking my life by trusting him. And that's one of the reasons that Charity does not understand at the beginning why Michael is here with this guy, Harry. Michael understands my trusting of this guy could mean the difference between doom for the world or not, right? Like this is a Christian man. Apocalypse means something to him, and it could be part of that vision.
Now, I think it's important to say that I don't think what you just said, that it's the 10% chance that he turns out good, is accurate for 3 reasons.
I agree. I'm just trying. I went to an extreme to show a demonstration that I think Michael would still do it in that case because he's a good man.
Yes, we completely agree. Michael would do whatever he thought.
I agree. It's more like a 50-50 coin toss kind of thing at that point in the book.
Well, I don't think it is, actually.
No?
And this is what I think is the important thing to notice. The early Soul-Gazes with Harry, before he has gone through things like being the Winter Knight, getting in the middle of the Dark Hallow, handing the word to Mavra, all of the crap that he has to deal with over the course of the series.
Killing Corpse Taker in cold blood.
Right. Morgan, axe-happy Morgan, doesn't kill him, right? Doesn't try to make up an excuse. No matter what, this guy's got to go. Susan falls in love with him. Michael says, I'm going to help him. And Ebenezer says, I'm going to teach him. All of these people believe that Harry, at his core, isn't damned. And I think that, maybe Ebenezer, it would be wishful thinking. Maybe Michael would do it no matter what. But Susan, I don't think she'd fall in love with him if his central being was that overwhelmingly scary. And I think Morgan would have found an excuse to kill him if he thought majority of the time this guy's the destroyer. But look at the later Soul-Gazes. The Kraken fleeing? Man, what the hell did that see?
Yeah, and Bradley is incapacitated on the ground for an extended time. I read that. It's like 2 pages where Harry's trying to talk Rudolph down, like, trigger discipline, detective, please. And Rudolph basically says, if you don't shut your mouth, I will shoot you the next thing that happens. And then the wolves show up to save him. But like that whole interaction, Bradley is still recovering from the soul gaze. Whatever he sees, it seems like it is clearly more extreme in some dimension than what Monica Sells sees in the first book.
Exactly. However, something that we should also keep in mind is that Bradley, from that point forward, is not just scared of Dresden. This is a bad guy that I'm going to cower in front of. He treats Dresden like he's Aragorn leading the army of the dead. Like, okay, I'm not going to try to stop this guy, and he's not necessarily bad, but I am getting out of the way and just doing whatever I have to do to not be part of the casualties.
Yeah, Harry's about to lead an army in that scene not too far later. So that's a good analogy. So I think that brings us to the end of our discussion here this week. It was a pretty long one because we did not have that much in these chapters. The big confrontation happens in the next set of chapters. It's the climax, the final climax of the book, and then it will be the conclusion of the book.
So our question for Bob for the next episode is, who did Denton make a deal with? He gets the belts from somebody. He kneels in front of some physical person, it seems like.
Mm-hmm.
Who is that?
Yeah, and is the same person who warned him about the White Council. Probably. We'll talk about that next time. Thanks for listening. Please direct any questions or topic suggestions to mac@rnt.fm. That's mac@rnt.fm. Recorded Neutral Territory is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial 4.0.